Okay, so hi everybody. First off, thank you all for taking the time out and attending our Introduction to Human Trafficking training. Just real quick, I know we're going to have like a share screen for this whole presentation. On the right hand side, you can control how you'd like to view the boxes for any of those who are not familiar with Zoom. On the right hand side of your screen, there's options where you can select just presenter box or gallery view or speaker view. So those are controlled on your end. So go ahead and do that as you wish. First off, my name is Sherry Young, and I work at Lake Family Resource Center. I'm the Victim Services Program Director, and I oversee the Domestic Violence Program, the Rape Crisis Center, our housing program, and our human trafficking programs. All of these which focus on family and community violence prevention and intervention and treatment services. This year, I've been here for, well, this October, I will have been with the agency for 10 years. And I'm just really, really happy that you invited us to speak today because we love presenting on our services, and human trafficking is a really hot topic right now. And I'll let Kara introduce herself and maybe her team.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. My name is Kara Roberts, and I'm the program coordinator for the Human Trafficking Program. I've been with the agency about 5 years now. I started out in the Rape Crisis Center, delivering a lot of victim services, and got to be, part of the pioneering crew to start the new Human Trafficking Program. So very excited about that. I have my two advocates here. I have Ray Eby and I have Blanca Pantaleon, and they're here to join and watch with you.
Awesome. So our information is at the bottom of the screen, our email and our phone number. If anyone wants to write that down, it will also be provided at the end of the presentation. We have asked everybody to keep their microphones muted. And if there are any questions, utilize the chat box between Kara and myself. We'll be looking back and forth at it. So we're going to try and get all this information to you guys in 1 hour. So we're going to move right along. All right, so during this presentation, what we would like you to take away from it is knowing what human trafficking is. So the definition, the elements of the crime, so what needs to happen for it to be a crime, some local and worldwide statistics, who are traffickers and what does the recruitment process look like, some signs of somebody who might be trafficked, and risk factors related to school-aged human trafficking, and just some resources that might be helpful for you in your line of work. So, what is human trafficking? Basically, human trafficking is the act of tricking, luring, or forcing a person to work for little or no payment. That's what it is. People are bought, sold, and traded every day in the United States, every day worldwide. This is the definition that comes from our federal guidelines. So human trafficking, it is as a recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by improper means. The means can be force, abduction, fraud, or coercion, which is tricking, for an improper purpose, which is forced labor or sexual exploitation. So in California, any crime in the penal code, there has to be certain elements in order for it to be a crime. Some elements have 3 points to them, some have 4. So for human trafficking, there's 3. There has to be an action, there has to be a means, and there has to be a purpose. So for the action, if you look at this box over here on the left-hand side, it's going to give you a few actions. Not all of these have to happen, but at least one. So just to break this down a little bit for you, an action, starting with induce. So induce is to persuade or influence somebody into doing something. Recruiting is going to be to lure somebody. Harboring is keeping someone in a certain place. Transporting is to move somebody. Providing is to give a person to another person for some type of work. And obtaining, which is going to be the actual buying of a service. One thing that I like to mention is that in human trafficking, you do not have to have movement. Sometimes people believe that you have to have movement for it to be a act of trafficking, but that's actually more of a smuggling definition, and a smuggling crime. So just to point that out. And then we have the second element, which is means. So you could either have force, which is through power of violence. There could be fraud, which is pretty much a false representation of a matter of fact, or there's going to be coercion, which is basically like the threats of harm or any plan or pattern to cause any type of person to have great bodily injury, or somebody they know to have great bodily injury. And then the result, which is the purpose. So this is going to be commercial sex, also known as sex trafficking, or labor trafficking. So labor services, working. One rule is that a minor, anybody under the age of 18, we do not have to have that middle category of means. So there's the action and the purpose. But under 18, there does not have to be force, fraud, or coercion. It will be human trafficking. So just to elaborate a little bit on what I mean by that is this is a really perfect graph. On the left-hand side, you can see that all of these examples of trafficking that I broke down to you, by any means, it doesn't have to be there. And I like this graph on the right-hand side because it just gives more examples of what options and results could look like. So for sex trafficking or labor trafficking, it could be pornography. It could be sexual assault, prostitution, or promotion of prostitution. So these are just examples of what we will see more so with the youth who are trafficked victims. So there's actually 4 different types of human trafficking. There is labor trafficking, there is sex trafficking, there is sexual exploitation of children, and trafficking of organ removal. Now, we have not, and I don't anticipate seeing much of this last one, which is the organ removal trafficking. I think it's like 1%, the statistic of how it happens. But I'm going to say in the very beginning of this presentation, and you might hear us talk about it a little bit more throughout, that sex trafficking is the most common type of human trafficking. And prostitution is going to be the most common type of sex trafficking that we see, which is led by false romantic relationships. So as we go further in this presentation, keep that in mind when you're learning some of this stuff, that is what we commonly see. So thousands of people worldwide fall victim to human trafficking.
Thank you, Sherry. And just to go over some of the statistics, granted it's not all of them, but some of the main ones, 27 million adults, 13 million children worldwide are being trafficked. It's the second largest criminal industry worldwide to the drug cartel, and it's quickly rising. It's the fastest growing. So we imagine it will be surpassing that soon. The gross is 32 billion a year in the US, 150 worldwide. And as Sherry pointed out earlier, it's mainly sex trafficking that's happening. So 80% is sex trafficking, leaving 19% for labor. Most of this is going to be with women. This is going to be happening with women, but it's not happening with the men and the boys as well. And the average age, as this kind of relates to you guys, the average age of entry is going to be between 12 and 14 years old.
And also, one thing I want to point out too is why human trafficking has become the second largest criminal industry and why it's expected to surpass is because drugs and weapons, you can sell them once, but a person you can actually sell over and over and over and over again. And so the revenue just keeps just climbing higher and higher, like every single day. And that's really sad. Kara, do you want to explain a little bit about perhaps why the ages of 12, even sometimes 9 to 14 is an average age of entry?
Absolutely. They're easier to manipulate, to groom, as we'll talk about a little bit later, and just kind of sway into doing what they want. They're more vulnerable at that age. Plus, you can get more money for services with a younger person.
Yeah.
So,
It's sad. It's sad when you think
pretty
about
sad.
that. And then when you're working or if you have children or work with children, it's really sad to think about that this is something that's actually something that actually happens. I like to just throw this in here because the intersection of domestic violence and sexual assault and human trafficking, it happens in almost every situation. And as we look with, in particular, the youth who are new at experiencing relationships, there's a lot of teen dating violence that goes on. Teen dating violence is interlinked, could be interlinked with human trafficking and sexual assault. But these are really interwoven in complex ways, and these intersections, they occur in numerous ways. And what I mean by that is, so if you have somebody who is a trafficker, they can also be a domestic violence abuser. So the trafficker will utilize the history of their victim's domestic violence past. Obviously, the youth might not have too much domestic violence going on if we're talking about, 15-year-olds or whatnot, but as people get older, there could be more history of abuse in their lifetime. So they might utilize witnessing domestic violence. So if there is a child in a home where their parents are involved in domestic violence, they could use that as a way to perpetrate them. And then vice versa, a domestic violence abuser. So that's what the traffickers will do. And then vice versa, a domestic violence abuser can utilize any victimization of trafficking or sexual assault that has happened to somebody. And what they basically do is they just use all these victimizations and they break them down more. They use it against them. And this X in the middle is the victim. Because if we have somebody who's sexually assaulted, a lot of times they were in a dating relationship or in a relationship with somebody that they know and they've trusted. And a lot of times that person who assaulted them is asking them to do things for them and make them feel that these acts are right or owed to the abuser. So it can be very confusing. And this X in the middle, this is somebody who's going to be referred as a poly victim. And we actually also have a presentation called The Intersections of Domestic Violence, Sexual Assault, and Human Trafficking, which we go further into depth on what this looks like and how it works. But they basically, a poly victim is somebody who has been victimized multiple times by multiple people. So there's a lot of similarities and experiences between all of these particular victims. They experience physical violence, restrictions on freedom of movement and control, isolation. A lot of times there is complete financial control. These relationships are driven by intimidation and fear. And sometimes there might be fostering of drug and alcohol dependencies. I know Kara will talk about that in a little bit when she talks about the grooming process. The elements are similar as far as power and control. So to abuse somebody in any way, somebody's making a choice. They are choosing to have power and control and to hurt another person. And very commonly, like I said in the very beginning, perpetrators will use relationships of trust to take advantage of a person. So I think we have time to show, this is a 5-minute video on what trafficking really looks like.
Are we on camera?
Yeah, baby.
Hey,
Make sure to show this at the wedding tomorrow. Filming a bachelor party ever amounts to anything good.
That's not a freedom. That's not a freedom.
That's up here on the right. Hey, up here on the right.
Where do the high school girls hang out?
I can show it to Sarah later, right?
The single most lucrative commercial enterprise in the world.
The fastest growing crime on the planet.
That girl.
Hey, we're gonna get shot.
Boys. Yes.
Welcome to heaven.
Sit.
It's a reality.
We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars.
Hey, Mark, we should probably cut the camera.
This is not a lifestyle choice.
It'll be as long as you wanna make it, you know.
We live in a world where we don't necessarily know what's going on next door.
Yeah.
I don't even know where we are right now.
Oh yeah, some serious massage.
If you're not seeing it, you're not looking for it.
Dude, what kind of place is this?
It's everywhere.
It's not even light out.
Moving to the song I hear, dancing it with this passion in my ear, my gushing memories almost lost.
They live under constant threat of violence, under constant threat or actual sexual abuse. They are given only enough food to sustain them.
We were coasting, moonlight illuminate my nights and my days. Sun ray make the people say, had a vision something missing, so they're screaming out loud. Keep my feet on the ground, my head in the clouds. Come the arrow, yo my boo, shoot me forth and I will go. I go when I go, get up and go. May not deal, it's my real, tell them what you know. Trying to lie in a garden hollering. That's when I started to sing. I said our death brings life unto uncertain things. Clouds of light for me, sunset in autumn breeze. Sound is moving like a chorus. Keep hearing that melody. Check the radio, nothing's playing. Check the radio again, but there's nothing playing. Moonlight illuminate my nights and my days. Sun ray make the people say, had a vision something missing, so there's.
I remember in particular one girl who was crying as she told her testimony. She wasn't crying because she had been forced into the sex trade. She wasn't crying because she had been beaten and raped. She wasn't crying because she'd been stripped naked and chained. She wasn't crying because her so-called parents had shoved a baton down her throat to get her to do it. She was crying because after her rehabilitation, which was coming to an end, she had nowhere else to go other than to return to those parents.
Sweet chariots of flame, change my name, no one's always the same. So the money what you find when you climb, and check the radio.
These are 12-year-old girls, 13-year-old girls who had been kidnapped, and their virginity was being sold to the highest bidder.
You can do it now.
Press turbo soon.
Good.
From them on a blast off onto the moon. But you might get caught in a temple of doom. You might get caught in a temple of doom. I say moonlight illuminate my night. By day sun ray.
For instance, in the sex industry, what makes slavery modern there is AIDS. You have a timeline on how long you can use a human being. And then when they're done, you just find another.
During the transatlantic slave trade, the value of a young male agricultural worker on U.S. soil was an equivalent of $40,000 today. You can buy that same young male agricultural worker on U.S. soil for about $300 today.
Never forget, justice is what love looks like in public.
It's time for the world to focus on acknowledging that slavery still exists. It's never gone away. But we put people on the moon. We have dolphin-friendly tuna. Why can't we do the same for kids and people?
Thank you, Sherry. So at this point, I usually, when we're doing this in person especially, I see a lot of reactions to the material. It's hard material. This is something that we're seeing and working with every day, but a lot of people are not seeing this. So we do have a crisis line. We will let you know the number at the end. If anybody's triggered, needs to talk to somebody about this, we have advocates available, every single day of the year, 24 hours a day. So feel free to reach out. And if you are a survivor of this kind of crime, then that doesn't exclude you from getting services. It could have happened 40 years ago. We are still here to help. So it's not time sensitive. So as we saw in the video, this is happening. This is happening outside of our country, right? It's happening all over the world, but is it happening here in Lake County? Is it happening in California? Since 2018 till now, we've served, and I think that number's wrong. I think it's more like 25. But we've served several sex trafficking cases, some labor trafficking cases. We anticipate with the new program rolling out, we'll see more and more. And why the increase from 2018 till now, we had educational pieces started coming into the county. Law enforcement was being trained, social services were being trained, speakers were coming in. There was awareness play down at the Soper Reese in Lakeport, which brought more awareness to the county. And so it's basically education, and that's what we're here to help you guys with today. So is Lake County a prime area for labor and sex trafficking activity? If anybody wants to throw anything in the chat box at any point on what their thoughts on that, feel free. But California is one of the top 3 states in the United States for human trafficking, with Texas and New York are the other 2. And then 3 of the top national 13 cities are right here in California. That's going to include like San Francisco, the Bay Area, Los Angeles, San Diego. Why would Lake County be a hub? Well, we're 2 hours north of San Francisco and the Pacific Coast and Sacramento. It's all a rising hub, and we're just kind of a pass through. Honestly, we're a rural area. It's easy to bring people here and hold them here. We've run into quite a bit of that. We have Interstate 5, which is a well-known pipeline for trafficking on one side of us. And then, on the other side, we have the Bay Area and all that going on. So right in between is going to be Lake County. And who are the traffickers? The traffickers can be anyone. They really can be. A lot of the time, you're going to find that it's the friends and family that are trafficking these children, these people. It's going to happen with gangs. It's pimps and madams, the adult industry, small business owners, large factory owners. Labor trafficking might be more prominent here in Lake County with all the agricultural community that we have going on here. That's something that needs to be brought to light, and we're in the process of doing that as well. I can never remember, Sherry, is this mine or yours?
All you, Kara.
All right, I got it. Okay, so how is this going to be done? Being tricked, that's the easiest one. It's the cheapest way to do it. Somebody comes in and promises a better life, or I'll be your boyfriend, and tricks somebody into a relationship and then isolates, as Sherry spoke about earlier. They could be lured with fake jobs. That's actually kind of common around here too. I've had several clients that came in under the premises that they were coming for a job, and then they were forced to stay here. And then forced, not often are you going to see forced. Forced is what you're going to see in like the movies, where people are kidnapped and stolen, taken. And that's actually the most expensive way, because then you're kidnapping, harboring, there's all these elements to it. So like I said, the tricked piece is the most prominent one.
Okay, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about what victims are actually made to do. So when we look at prostitution and we look at forced labor, the sex traffickers for prostitution, oftentimes they're going to subject their victims to debt bondage. So they're going to tell their victims that they owe them money. And this is oftentimes going to be related to like their living expenses or expenses that were accumulated during their romantic relationship. And then they're told that they must pledge their personal services to repay back all of that debt. So they're forced into various forms of commercial sexual exploitation. This could include prostitution, pornography, stripping, live sex shows, mail order brides, just to name a few. We see here in Lake County, like I mentioned in the beginning, that prostitution is usually more common. And you know what? I'm not even going to say even in Lake County, all around prostitution is more common. But we do see that here. It's like said in the past slide, it's very easy for the trafficker to control that particular sex act. And it's also very common that victims may start off dancing or in stripping clubs. That's really common. And then they're coerced into more serious situations of prostitution and porn. So that's kind of what it looks like for the sex type work. For forced labor, forms of trafficking, these also are going to usually be linked for bonded labor or forced labor. So bonded labor is also known as debt bondage. And this is usually the most widely used method. So again, the victim will become a bonded laborer when their labor is demanded as a means of repayment for a loan or for a service, and the value of their work is usually greater than the original loan itself that was borrowed. Forced labor is going to be a situation in when victims are required to work against their own will, under the threat of violence or any other type of punishment. Their freedom is usually going to be restricted and a degree of ownership is usually exerted. And so this is where we see domestic servitude. So this is like live-in help, forced marriages, agriculture labor, sweatshop factories. The sweatshop factories, this is where workers are packed like into really small places with machinery. They're breathing like dusty filled air, working 14 to 18 hours a day for little or no pay, and just in a really illegal working environment. We also can see janitorial services, food services, basically any service that's going to have industry of labor. So that is what it looks like in a snapshot as far as what people are made to do when recruited into this lifestyle.
So what does recruitment look like? Pimps, as I mentioned the word before, vulnerable, and that's going to apply to the younger crowd especially, but pimps prey on the vulnerable. They'll groom them with attention, gifts, and affection. The whole process involves compliments, attention, love, gifts. As you see on here, the more vulnerable populations are going to be people that aren't necessarily receiving this normally. And so they're going to be, extra hungry for this kind of attention. Maybe they'll give them drugs and alcohol to control them, create emotional bonding. You can pull Stockholm syndrome into that. And then possibly they become violent when the victim resists. Not only would they be violent with them, but there could be threats on their family and their loved ones.
I just want to elaborate too. Kara mentioned that they could use drugs or alcohol in the beginning, but that is something that most traffickers don't like to keep into their victim system because they can sell the victim for more money, the cleaner and the more made up they are. And if they're sober and not taking care of themselves, that's less money that a trafficker can get for one of their victims. And so I want to point that out as well. They use it usually towards the grooming process, but it's not common to continue on. Not saying that that doesn't happen. There are situations where traffickers keep their victims intoxicated at all times, but it's not that common.
Okay, and we've talked about vulnerable populations a couple of times now, and so now we're going to get a little more detail on what that looks like. It's quite common for runaways and children that are in foster care to be a vulnerable population. Again, because they're not receiving that love, they don't have the security. That's something they're searching for. Immigrants, they're going to come in and they're going to be vulnerable. They're not going to have maybe legal paperwork to get into the country or stay into the country. Victims of physical and sexual abuse, drug addicts or alcoholics, all these people are people that are more vulnerable in one way or another. Perhaps they're LGBTQ and they haven't been accepted by their family. They're, again, looking for love, for some kind of stability, for somebody to want them. And then there's a trend on people with disabilities as well, because they're going off the vulnerability that they may not know any better and fall easily into this kind of work. So some risk factors for youth, there's a lot that are similar here that I've already mentioned. Runaways from home, the foster care, maybe unstable home environment, they lack social support or personal safety. Maybe they have a history of being sexually abused as children, or dating violence. We talked about LGBTQ. They experience chronic maltreatment and neglect, have low self-esteem. Especially right now during COVID, a lot of kids are living in isolation right now. You know, it's mom's working, dad's working, and they're in their room alone with their laptop. Perhaps they live in poverty, they have mental illness we talked about, just emotional distress, and a big one is gang affiliation.
And we do have some small gangs here in Lake County, so it's definitely a possibility that that can be happening here too.
So where does recruitment happen? Now, obviously, when you're in the bigger cities, you're going to have more of these things available. But we do have some things. We do have schools. We do have, you know, parks, fast food restaurants. We have courtroom hallways and parks and playgrounds and foster homes. But the courtroom hallways is interesting because it's a prime recruitment area because there's, again, vulnerable population that are in trouble, you know, and looking for some way out or, you know, someone to accept them. And so they could just be prowling courtrooms and hallways to pick up, you know, maybe kids that are in trouble or even adults. There's actually a documentary that talks about this this pimp he was telling a story. He would watch the arrest logs and see young vulnerable girls getting arrested and then reach out to them and communicate with them while they were locked up. So they were grooming and recruiting while they were locked up and sending them money and putting it on the books to where when they came out, they went right into their arms. So marketing, recruiting for exploitation, you know, there's going to be a lot of websites that you can go to, and as soon as one is taken down, there's 5 more up. It's quite common. Backpage has already been taken down, but this list, you know, maybe these are all gone and 80 more have come up at this point. But the internet is going to be a huge place for recruiting. Sexually oriented businesses, strip clubs, massage parlors. Word of mouth is going to be big when you're in a rural area and the recruitment sites are kind of limited. And then, you know, plain abduction, just taking someone.
All right, so this also is going to be more on increased risk and vulnerability. And the reason why I wanted to show this one is because it points out some things that are happening right now during COVID and social distancing and distance learning. So it just is going to add more fuel on the recruitment and options and availability. So when you look at the fact, most schools still are, if they haven't turned into a hybrid model, are working and learning from home. So with the school closures, this is going to disrupt a lot of the children's routines. And thinking, like Kara said earlier, some homes are not safe for all students, and there could be domestic violence in the homes. So that is definitely an increased risk. The increased burdens. So there's fewer available services in some areas. Lake Family Resource Center, we are still offering full services, even though we might be offering them on virtual platforms or phone calls. We're still going to do everything we can to make sure that somebody is safe. A lot of the kids at home are taking care, parentification of their other siblings and acting as head of household or abusing alcohol and drugs. So those additional challenges with COVID-19, the shutdown, the closure of normal activity, we have tons. We have thousands of kids right now at home on the internet every day. Yes, they are receiving education. That is wonderful. And yes, they are connecting with their peers and their teachers, and that is fantastic. But there's also a loophole in there where the traffickers know this. They know how to manipulate online systems. They recruit, they prey. This is a perfect time for a trafficker to find a child online because those kids want to reach out and make more friends. So a trafficking detective said, predators spend entire days trolling Facebook, looking for girls who post about fighting their parents or feeling left out of school. So think about that. I don't even know what all of these extra boxes are. I know what Instagram and Snapchat and Twitter. I don't know some of these other ones, but the kids do, and they're on them and they're using them, and they might think they're making new friends. So again, this is just another thing to be aware of when it comes down to what's happening online and how vulnerable our youth are right now, and those youth who are not educated and they don't know what to look out for. And
Can I throw one thing in there, Sherry, as well?
Sure.
Besides the fact that they're home and, you know, with the COVID and lockdown and can't go out and see their friends, these traffickers are out there still working their victims, still making them work, not putting any kind of safety like protocol in place for their health. You know, they're getting sick and they're not going to get them treated. And so in that case, people are going to be dying off, and they're going to be doing an even harder push to try and find more girls or boys that they can force into this lifestyle.
Right. And that's really sad when it comes down to the health outcomes of the trafficking and our pandemic on top of everything, increasing those risks. This is a 3-minute video, just a little bit more about online grooming and the way that it can look.
In the online world, predators use the same tactic, and it's what we call grooming, or law enforcement calls grooming. They build a relationship, they try to understand what they care about, they give them compliments, sometimes they'll even send presents or say nice things, and eventually a teen will start having feelings for a predator. And it's at that point where the danger begins.
The grooming behavior that we have seen can take months, or it can take a very short amount of time, depending on the offender.
And little by little, the conversation will turn off into a very sexual nature, and they'll start to talk to the child about what their interests are, and they'll try to find out what the child's interests are. And often they will get the child to say things that the child couldn't even imagine talking about. And sometimes children will talk about things that they don't even know what they mean, because they're clearly very adult sexual conversations.
They are inundated with sexual images and sexual conversation that allow them to very freely participate in those types of conversations and activities. Typically, I would just start by asking for a regular picture, and then if it got to that level, I would eventually ask for a picture of more of a sexual nature.
Grooming is really easy to understand once you give thought to it. Everybody wants to feel love. And these people online are willing to make you feel that way. And you know, it never occurs to you that the person that you're talking to may be a monster. And they do it in the most subtle ways. You know, you get in a fight with a friend. Your friend called you that? Oh my gosh, why would your friend ever call you that? That's not a friend. I'm your real friend. I would never say anything like that. And they pull you away from everything around you, you know, all your friends and your family and your teachers. And as you're getting pulled away, you're getting closer to him.
One of the devices that these predators use in the interactions with kids is sending them explicit photos of themselves. What they're trying to do is sort of deaden the nerve endings. They're trying to beat down the resistance. It's part of the grooming process to normalize what they're trying to do, and it's pretty insidious.
You're on mute, Kara.
My bad. So we just have a few more things to go over. We want to talk about some victim warning signs, some common ones you're going to see in adults, but I want to pay more attention to signs you're going to look for in your students. Maybe you're going to see someone that's not allowed to speak for themselves, they're malnourished. We talked about not having control over money, personal, like very few personal possessions, maybe just like a purse or a backpack. Avoids eye contact when talking to in others, like social interaction. That's going to be like with anybody that's authoritative in any way, there's going to be a lack of eye contact. So what to look for students specifically, maybe academically, they're not engaged all of a sudden, or they're performing under grade level. Their grades have just dropped really quickly with no real explanation. Maybe socially, they have an older partner that, you know, you have a 15-year-old with a 24-year-old boyfriend, something along those lines is something to watch for. They live in an abusive home that's unstable. And a lot of kids, I know from my experience, I have 3 teenagers of my own. They're going to have more than one online profile for different accounts. And so maybe mom and dad have the regular one that they want them to see, but there's going to maybe be a highly sexual online profile that's out there. We talked about behavioral with the eye contact. Maybe there's some gaps in their memory. There's resistant or reactive to being touched. Physically, they have some bruises and scars, or they're, again, malnourished. That's common. Maybe they're starting to show signs of drug and alcohol addiction. Emotionally, we talked about low self-esteem already. Maybe they're exhibiting more depression or anxiety. And that's quite common in teenagers now, period, is there's a lot of anxiety and depression going on. And especially now that they're all, you know, working from home. Maybe they're having like sudden outbursts of anger. These are all signs to keep an eye out for.
So those are great warning signs, things to look out for. Another thing is physical indicators of trafficking. So a lot of times trafficked victims have certain tattoos on them. Human traffickers, they do like to brand their victims with tattoos to assert their ownership over those that they are trafficking. So a lot of times they're going to be marked with barcodes or numbers, and that's going to show that the person is over the age of 18 years old. So very simply put, I like to always say this, you brand cattle, right? You brand cattle, and that's exactly how traffickers view people, as a commodity to buy and sell. I'd like to share that there was this one study, there was this one lady in Romania, and she was branded with a barcode and a certain amount of money. And the investigators suspected that the money that was tattooed on her was the amount of money that the woman had to make before she would be released. So the National Crime Agency said that victims were told by traffickers that they would have to raise these amounts of money as large as $64,000 before they would regain their freedom. And let me tell you this, most never actually get their freedom. They usually die. Okay. They usually never make it out of this vicious life. Some victims will have their traffickers' names or initials tattooed on their body parts, such as like the face, the neck, something that is more visible. And they will also have things that have like money bags or crowns or items of like currency, diamonds. And one thing I want to be really clear is though many people do have tattoos, and I have seen some of these tattoos on people, but if you have, and it's not like a 100% indicator, but if you have somebody who has multiple tattoos and some of the other signs and symptoms that Kara was speaking about, then this is a red flag. This is the time that you need to start asking questions. Kara, did you have anything you wanted to add? I know we've only got a few more minutes, but anything on the tattoos?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are some programs as I've reached out, and you'll find that a lot of, even in our small community, a lot of business owners want to help out in some way or another. So I casually reached out to a couple of tattoo parlors here locally, and they offered to do free cover up if there were any human trafficking related tattoos that somebody wanted covered up. They would do it for free. There's a program out of Sacramento that covers all, or I think most, if not all, of the cost of having tattoo removal done for somebody that's trying to get out of human trafficking as well. So there are resources out there to help with that.
Definitely. Thank you for that. And we can hook and connect anybody up who might be in need of those resources. So you can always contact us if you know of anybody. So we've talked about some physical indicators and behavioral indicators. Another sign could be the way that somebody is talking. So looking at this list right here, kitty stroll, trick, seasoning, stable, pimp circle. I don't know. I didn't know what these meant before I started working here. Maybe somebody in this group knows what some of these words mean, and the rest of you might be like, what the heck is this? So
well, a lot of you have probably heard a lot of these words in the rap music as well these days.
That too. And the teens are singing them, not knowing what the heck they're talking about, just repeating it because it's cool, right? This is sex traffic language. Basically, what I am wanting to say is that when I look at these personally, I can think back about the first time that I heard a racial slur. I was like 5 or 6 years old, and I shared that with my classmates, and I got in trouble, and I had no clue why I was in trouble for what I had just said. And I didn't understand why my teacher was asking me to apologize when, to my knowledge, I hadn't done anything wrong. I was explained later by my family member that what the word had meant, and it continues to be. And that at the very young age of 5 or 6 years old, I learned the power of words. So I'm not asking everybody to understand and go and look at all the definitions and understand this dictionary of words, but we need to understand the language and that there is a language of human trafficking. We have to understand that there is such thing. And if we don't have a grasp of a little bit of this terminology, then how are we to understand what victims are going through? If there's a teen and they're in a counseling session and they're using some of these words, it's really important because as somebody who's there for a student, how would you communicate with somebody about their experience or about what they're going through? Like, how can we acknowledge what they've been subjected to if we have no idea what they're talking about when they start using all of these words in a conversation with us? So just being aware of the literal meaning of words, we need to be really cognizant of their distinctions. And some of these words, they might seem straightforward. I think people know what a John is, but a lot of them aren't. So I'm not going to go into detail of all of these words with you guys today. If you are interested, I can email out the definition of all of them and share them with you guys. But one thing that I would just caution you to be aware of is that if you encounter somebody who has this jargon and you're sitting with somebody and they say that they are going into automatic because daddy caught a case, that's definitely a sign to start asking more questions. That's definitely a sign that somebody was either in this particular life or they're involved with somebody who is, or they might be themselves. So approaching and understanding the language can really help our individuals and our communities and our schools to just more intimately understand the issue of human trafficking. So when you put the sex trafficking language and the tattoos and all of the signs that Kara spoke about, it's time to ask questions. This graph is great for why we're presenting here today. Why educational partners are essential. Why are all of you essential to us? I'm going to tell you one thing. School personnel are the most common group to come into regular contact with young victims who are being trafficked. More than likely, some of the students, when we are in session, are walking the halls of your schools, and we are not aware of it. A lot of times, traffickers are going to use the school as a place to recruit their victims. Students might recruit each other. Adults might recruit on or near campus. Traffickers might be texting or contacting students while they're attending school simply to maintain that control of their victim. So as you can see, school staff, you guys are like the number one people to begin intervention and prevention with these young students. And it's so extremely crucial that that's known and acknowledged. So what can you do? What can you guys all do? These are simple action steps. Do a safety check. If you think that you might have a student who is in this situation, ask, are they currently safe at school? Are there safety concerns outside of school? Are any of these trafficking indicators that you learned today present? If so, involve the school resource officers as appropriate. You can contact 911 or local law enforcement or your whatever your chain of command is in your district or your schools. And submit a report to Child Welfare Services. I believe everybody is mandated in this group, but I could be wrong. And then lastly, refer to local services as appropriate, and then we have national hotlines as well. So these are steps that you guys can take. They're really easy.
I just want to add, Sherry, too, that during all of these reporting processes, no matter who you're, calling and reporting to, it's always good to have an advocate there, and that's what we are. We'll come in and be their support person, and they can have a safe place and a safe person that's not law enforcement or school or authority of any way, and we're just a support person there for them, and it's really important.
Right. So just in closing our presentation, this is the end of our presentation. I'm going to show you just a 4-minute video on how this all ties together and what a victim looks like.
I was born and raised in a small town in Southern Oregon, and I was a good kid in school. I grew up in a normal middle-class family. I got great grades. I was really active in sports, and I even graduated a year early. I was accepted into Oregon State University, and I had my dorm room already assigned, and I was really excited to move up to Corvallis. But that summer, I got pregnant by my boyfriend, and I had to make a real tough decision whether I was going to keep my baby and unenroll from university or get an abortion and keep it all a secret. And that was a really tough summer for me. After I had the baby, I had some friends that had gone up to U of O to go to college, and they had an extra room in one of their apartments. It was at that time that I met a boy or a guy who pretended to take interest in me. I really thought he liked me, and we got along really well. He was really funny and charming, and he had a nice car, and he always picked up the tab. He had nice clothes. He told me he was a record producer, that he had a band up in Portland, and that's why he frequently went out of town. There's a saying that says when you take a child by the hand, you take the mother by the heart. And I really think that's what happened for me, because I had this new little girl and this man who showed this desperate attention towards her, like he wanted to really help make this family that I really wanted for my daughter. And he invited me to move in with him after about 6 months of dating, and I was really excited. And I brought him down to Southern Oregon to meet my family, and everything seemed fine until we arrived in Las Vegas. He said we were moving there because that was the entertainment capital of the world, and being a record producer and having a band, that's where they were going to get the most gigs and the most jobs, and that's where his job was leading him. So I desperately wanted to go with him, to be with him, and to start this family that he promised me. He pulled up to an escort service, and he said, "This is how it works in Vegas. I've spent a lot of money to get you here. I put first and last on an apartment. I filled your fridge up with food, and you're gonna need to earn that money back." And I felt trapped. I felt like, how am I gonna get out of this? And you didn't know if you were gonna live or die. You didn't know what he was gonna do or what he was capable of, and so it was really scary. I can remember just running through the casino thinking, like, these people don't even have a clue what's going on. They're just, cha-ching, cha-ching, Las Vegas, yay! And they're doing all this stuff, and I'm running for my life. I'm running from a man that has forced me into doing things that I didn't want to do. When you have a trafficker that's waiting at home with your child and says, if you don't bring home $1,500, you're gonna find your daughter out on the corner, I think I was probably more frightened to go home than I was to be in the room. Because if you got robbed, it was your fault for being stupid. If you got raped, it was your fault for not watching your back. Anything that happened to you was typically your fault, and you incurred more punishment for allowing those things to happen to you. So it made you always walk in fear of your trafficker.
Rebecca Bender is she's a survivor leader. She's an author and advocate and is doing absolutely amazing. Her daughter has grown up, and it's a really awesome story as far as what she's doing now to help everybody out there in this situation.
To help other
Really
survivors.
Yeah, really quickly, I know we are at our hour before everybody logs off. If you could just perhaps write in your chat box and say here, I can go ahead and collect that as a sign-in sheet because it's needed for my grant purpose. So please do that before you guys leave. Here again are some local and national resources for human trafficking. You can now call or text our community hotline. I know that the youth love to text, so that is now an option that we are offering at Lake Family Resource Center. Thank you again. Kara and I are so very passionate and love to teach and talk and spread awareness about human trafficking. So please call us or email us if anybody has any questions. And if there are any questions now, you guys can ask away. Kara, if you have anything else.
I don't have a lot else. I'm really excited about the text option that we just started on the crisis line. This is going to be huge. It's going to reach a whole different audience of people, younger people who don't want to get on the phone and talk, or they're not safe and they can't talk. So very excited to introduce the text option. Does anybody have any questions? You can just